Well, a very, very warm welcome to you guys. Hi, it's Cassim, and welcome to the first episode of Leadership 101. I want to firstly start off by saying thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that something that I share with you today can help you to become a higher, fuller expression of who you're capable of becoming. You might be wondering, why, Cassim, have you decided to start a leadership series? So let me explain. For the last 6.5 years, I've been on a quest to answer two questions. The first question that I've been wanting to know is, how do you build an incredible life? And the reason why I've wanted to know the answer to that question is because that's what I wanted. I wanted to know, how can I, as Cassim, have an incredible life? How is it that I can get some of the things that I wanted? What were those things? I wanted to be happy. I wanted to build wealth. I wanted to be able to take care of my family. I wanted to be able to eat the food that I wanted. I wanted to be able to travel around the world. I wanted to be able to have freedom. I wanted to be able to express all the different versions of who I am. In essence, I wanted to live my best life ever. So my question was, how do I do that? The second question that I wanted to know was, how do I build and create and pursue that best life ever without ending up divorced, without ending up killing myself when I've got there, without ending up stepping on other people to get there, without ending up turning into a dick or an arsehole, without ending up manipulating people, and when eventually I do make it, I don't end up becoming corrupt, I don't end up becoming one of the people who doesn't pay taxes, I don't end up one of the people who works all the time but doesn't see their family. Why? Because I wanted to know, I wanted to be that kind of person. I wanted to be the kind of person who was not only successful, but also had a home life balance, and was also a good human being, and was also the kind of individual who managed to achieve success, but also gave back. Somebody who understood what he'd been given and the responsibility and the position and the influence, but also gave back. And my question in the pursuit of those two questions, I found what I call principles. I found what I call keys, reasons why or how, ways in which somebody can be able to build that kind of life if they so desire it. And as I began to look at these keys, I began to realize that all of these keys were pretty evident. So for example, to be successful, you got to have a vision, you got to know what you want, you've got to work really hard. These things were not kind of new age kind of thinking. These weren't things I'd never heard of before. These were very simple principles. These were very simple ideas. It's just that I'd never applied them in my life, which led me to then questioning, and I began to look at other people as well, and I began to see that many of these issues that I was experiencing were the same issues that many other people were experiencing. And so I started to look at, if everybody pretty much knows that in order to get what you want, you kind of need to have a vision, you need to have a goal, you need to work really hard, you want to have a group of people around you who can support you, why are people not doing it then? If everybody knows, and I think every single one of you who's listening to me can agree with me, most of us, the things that we want out of life are pretty attainable. I don't think that the average person has anything that they want out of their life which is like a pioneering kind of goal, which is something which is unheard of. Most of us kind of would like to be happy. Most of us would like to build a family. Most of us would like to raise happy, healthy children. Most of us would like to be able to travel around the world. Most of us would like to be able to earn a decent income. Obviously, we all have different ways about achieving these different goals, and some of us may want these in bigger quantities than others. Some of you may be listening to me and may be saying, actually, Cassim, while some people may be satisfied with earning 50k a year, in order for me to really build the kind of life that I want, I may need to be earning 400k a year, right? So whilst all of us may want the same kinds of things, we may want them in different quantities. And I think all of us can pretty much agree that most of the things that we want are pretty attainable. Yeah, it may take us 10, 15, 20, 30 years to achieve them, but we know that we can get them. So my question was, if everybody knows that we can get what we want, why is it that most people are not getting these things? And I came across this word leadership. And it was kind of accidental because I never really, initially, when I first started off, this was not something that I was even interested in. And it was not something that I was in any way, I could see any relation to it in relation to success or in relation to achieving greatness in our lives. And the more that I looked at this leadership, the more I realized I didn't know very much about it. And the more that I studied it and the more that I applied it in my life, the better the results that I got. And as I've looked around at the world today, I began to realize, and the more that I've observed people's lives and the more that I've observed the world and the crises that are happening around the world, the more I've realized that we are in need of leaders today. We are in need of individuals who can think like a lion and envision like an eagle. So many of us in life operate our lives from a sheep mentality, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But we are in dire need, and let me just give you some things that I want to talk about that I think are really important. So we live in a world today, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, but we clearly are living in a world in the UK and across the world where we've got a lot of problems that need solving. Now, you may disagree with me here, but tell me if I'm wrong here. But I just wrote down a few of the things that I think we need correcting in the world. So, for example, I was looking at the youth offending rate, and I found that 51% of the boys in the youth offenders institutions are boys, which are basically boys which are aged between 15 and 17, and then it's young men which are aged between 18 and 21, identify themselves to be part of BME. BME stands for Black and Minority Ethnics. So that basically means that 51% of the young people who are in the youth offenders institutes are young black men, more than half of them. And my question to us is, why are so many of the black community and the black minority ending up in prison? Why is more than half of all of them ending up in prison? And many of you guys will have friends of yours, best friends, you will have really close friends, neighbors. And according to these statistics, this now tells us that there is a more than likely chance that either your best friend or a close friend of yours' children are going to end up in this, because according to the statistics, the system does not favor them. I look at more at this, and I find that the unemployment rate at the moment in the UK is that we've got 1.5 million people who are currently unemployed. Now, you may not think that that's a big problem, but I think that that is a major problem, because we live in the modern world and we have 1.5 million people who are unemployed, which means that clearly there is a crisis, an employment crisis that is on our hands and somebody needs to solve. I then look at the homelessness crisis, and I find that last year we had 320,000 people who were homeless. Now, I look at that and ask myself, how can we live in modern Britain and we have all of this amazing facilities and resources at our disposal, and yet we have members of the human race, around 320,000 of them, who are homeless? I look further and I begin to see that as we look at the national debt in the UK, we have over 2 trillion pounds worth of debt. And I look at that and ask myself, what's going to happen with that debt? Who is going to be the kind of leader who is going to sort that out, right? Where is the money going to come from that is going to fund and pay off that 2 trillion pounds? I further look and we've got a housing crisis, right? Most of the people who live in the UK, you will be familiar with, buying a house in the UK is not cheap. Just even getting a deposit in itself is clearly not that easy. I go further. I look at the fact that we've got gender inequality, right? Many of you guys have brothers and sisters in your own households, and I can tell you that in some companies and in many companies today, they don't get paid the same amount of money as other men who do the same job, and they get the same results. They don't get paid the same amount of money. We've got a global and mental, we've got a global mental and physical crisis. We know that the largest proportion of suicide rates are from men who are 16 to 25. So we know that clearly there is a crisis with mental health today, and many of you who are listening to me, you may be part of that crowd of people who are suffering from mental health. You may have an obesity problem in your family. We've got a climate crisis problem. We've got human rights and a lack of access to justice crisis happening around the world. By the way, let me explain what a crisis is. A crisis is an event that happens that is outside of our control. So a crisis could be considered as something like the rain. Clearly nobody can control the rain. The rain is outside of your control. As much as you can plan and say, I'm going to have a raincoat and buy a raincoat and buy an umbrella, the reality is that the rain is outside of your control. So crisis is outside of your control. Right? So I think you will agree with me that we've clearly got a lot of problems that need solving in the world. And my question is, who is supposed to solve these problems? Now, I've just given you an overview of course, much bigger topics and much bigger subjects that need clearly on a global scale and on a national scale need solving. But we can bring this down to a level where we start talking about, for example, you. Many of us in our lives, we have a crisis where we want to buy a house, but we don't have the money. We want to get into a relationship, but we don't have a partner. We want to be able to pursue a career, but we don't know what career we want to go into. And this is where I discovered the significance of leadership. And I've wrote down a number of statements. I've wrote down too many statements and too many notes to get into today. But I'm just going to work my way through these notes, and I'm going to share with you some things that I think are really important and why it is that it is so important for you to really develop leadership in your life, to really look at this, to really study what leadership is and why it is so important. Because I believe very strongly that we are in a world today where we lack leaders. And we need leaders. In fact, let me begin off with one of the first comments that I wrote down here, which is some of the reasons why leadership is so important. You see, I wrote down here that without leadership, nothing happens. Nothing happens without leadership. Number 2, nothing changes without leadership. Number 3, nothing develops without leadership. Number 4, nothing improves without leadership. Let me stop on that point right there. Nothing improves without leadership means that if you have a crisis in your life where something is going wrong, you're in debt, you're obese, nothing can change in your life until you begin to adopt leadership in your life. In other words, you have to get to the point where you say, I can no longer blame society, I can no longer blame my parents, I can no longer blame what products they put in food, I can no longer blame the government. I am going to take responsibility and solve this problem, right? And until I take responsibility for it, I am not going to improve my health. I'm not going to improve my mental health. I'm not going to improve how much money I earn every year. I'm not going to improve my working conditions. Until you take up leadership, none of this can be improved. And the last one is that nothing is corrected without leadership. You know, it's interesting for me to look at South Africa. South Africa is a very interesting place because, of course, many of you will know Nelson Mandela is one of the big figures of South Africa. And I think back to all the years of oppression and apartheid that took place in South Africa. And I think about how many people deep down in their soul knew that the apartheid wasn't right. So many people knew that the way they were being treated by the foreigners or by the oppressors was not correct, but nobody did anything about it. And what I'm going to say to you is, the day that you begin to think like a leader and the day that you become a leader is the day that you decide somebody has to do something about this, and I'm going to be that person. And so one of the first things that I wanted you to share with you that I think is really important is I talk about what I call life-defining days. I believe that every human being has in their own life-defining days. Days when they basically reach a crossroads. A day when something major happens in their life that changes the course of their life. For example, a major defining day for somebody might be the day they have a child, the day they are convicted of a crime and have to go to prison, the day that a parent dies. All of these are life-defining days. And there is a life-defining day that every human being could have but may never have. And that defining day is the day that you realize that you have the ability to affect change. Most human beings, and most of you guys who are listening to me, do not believe that you can affect change. You do not believe that one person can make a difference. You do not have the philosophy that the late Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, you know, the products that you have, the iPhone and the iPad and the iMac, the person who first came up with that idea was a man called Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs said that the mission and one of the purposes and the goals of Apple was to leave a dent in the universe. And most people do not believe that they can leave a dent in the universe. They don't believe that their actions can actually affect people in their own lives. I love something that Buddha once said, and I've quoted this so many times, which says that good people have to wake up and try to empty the ocean with a spoon. You see, the day that you realize that you can actually affect change, you become a very dangerous person, actually. And the reason why you become very dangerous is because you now have the power to actually affect change. And you may get to a point, in fact, you will get to a point where you're almost overwhelmed, where you're almost like, how can my little contribution surely make a big difference in the world? How can me trying to protect dogs, or me trying to start a blog, or me trying to start a company, or me trying to help youth really change the world? When you discover that is an issue, but yet you're still going to do it anyway, you now have just become a leader. Because there are some emotions that I attribute, and I'm not going to get too much into these because that's for way later on down in the series when I talk about this in a different episode. But one of the emotions that happens that creates leaders is the day that a leader says, I can't take this. If you look throughout history, and let's go back to Nelson Mandela. So many people believed that obviously the apartheid wasn't right, but many people didn't do anything about it. And this man called Nelson Mandela came along, just an average Joe blog, and he said, I can't take it. I cannot take seeing my people being oppressed in this way. And that day that he said, I can't take this anymore, I can't stand it, I can't live with myself anymore, was the day that he became a leader. So let me share with you one of the other things about leadership that I think is really important. Leadership is not about power. Leadership is not about talent. It is not about skill. It is not about social status. It is not about charisma. It is not about position. It is not about money. It is not about influence. Many of you guys who are listening to me will believe that leadership is about all of those things that I've just said. You will believe that you cannot be a leader unless you have money, unless you have power, unless you have influence, unless you have position, unless you have social status, unless you're somebody who's charismatic. Nelson Mandela was none of those things. In fact, if you will study any of the great leaders throughout history, you will find that the people who changed the world, none of them were in positions of power. None of them had so-called charisma. None of them were really that skillful. None of them were exactly that talented. But they got to a point where they said, I can't take this anymore. This is where businesses are born. When somebody says, I cannot take the way people are treating dogs. When somebody says that, all of a sudden a leader is born, because now they don't care if they don't become famous, or they don't have the skills, or they don't have the knowledge, or they don't have the resources. They don't care. It is irrelevant. They're willing to do it without anybody. They're willing to do it without having skills. And this is now where you become a leader, because when you start thinking in this mentality of, if I need to learn something, I'll learn it. If I need to go somewhere, I'll go there. If I need to go alone, I will go alone. And so let me share with you on that topic, and on that line, something which is really interesting. One of the days that will be defining for you, and the day that you will know that you're on the track to becoming a leader, is the day that you decide that you're okay to go alone. You see, most of us think like managers. Most of us are managers in our lives. Managers talk about what the problems are. They talk about what the issues are. They talk about the complaints. They talk about what's not working. They talk about how these things are wrong in the department, about what this system doesn't work. The leader disrupts everything. A leader says, okay, if it's not working, how can we improve it? Our leader says, okay, if these people are complaining, how can we stop them from complaining? It's the same situation, but a leader thinks completely different about it. And so one of the things that a leader does and separates them from managers and from the followers and from everybody else is that leaders are prepared to go alone. The day that you discover something that you're willing to do alone or for free is the day that you become a leader. Because most people want everybody to agree with them. Most people want everybody to affirm them. Most people want consensus on everybody, from everybody. Most people want huge support, huge resources. Most people want to be ready. They want all the right equipment, and then they will go ahead and fight a war. That is not how leaders think. And this really is one of the critical things that I want to share with you. I would say the major thing that separates leaders from everybody else in society is that leaders think differently. Leaders look at the same situation, but they see it in a completely different light. And I would share with you, because this is so significant that I want you to get it. The day that you decide that something is so important to you that it has so much priority in your life that you're willing to do it by yourself, that you're willing to do it even if you're not being paid for it, is the day that you become a leader. So the question that I pose to you, and I guess it's something that you want to think about, is what do you have in your life that you are fighting for, that you believe in so much that you are prepared to do it for free, that you're prepared to do it alone, that you are prepared to fight? In fact, that leads me into one of the next things that I wanted to talk to you about, which was this. I wrote down here that leadership mandates that you step out of the shadows and into the light. So for you cannot lead from the back. Let me repeat that statement because it's so significant. Leadership mandates that you step out of the shadows and into the light, for you cannot lead from the back. You see, most people, as I've just briefly mentioned, do not ever become leaders in their own lives. They don't become leaders of people, of organizations. They don't take up leadership roles primarily because most people don't want conflict. And unfortunately, the moment that you begin to stand up for something is when all of a sudden conflict happens. Most people would rather ghost through life, they would rather fight for nothing, they would rather say nothing, they would rather not disrupt the status quo, and that allows them to operate their life like a sheep. If you go into a field and you walk past sheep, it's easy to go past them and not notice them. But I'm telling you, if you go past a field or you go past an area where there's lions, I am telling you, you will be alert. You will pay attention. And most people go through their lives trying not to upset anybody, trying not to break the status quo. And that is part of the reason why no progress can ever be made. One of the things that I said to you earlier on is that without leadership, nothing improves. You see, if you are in the shadows and you are trying to coast along and you're trying not to upset anyone and you're trying to not disrupt anything, how can anything possibly improve? If something needs correcting in the world, in your town, in your life, until you have the mindset of a leader to say that I'm willing to accept the wrath of my family, the wrath of my missus, the wrath of my friendships. I'm willing to disrupt the equilibrium. I'm willing to disrupt the patterns that have been for generations, for years, for months, in order for things to improve, in order for me to correct something, then nothing can be corrected. Some of you guys who are listening to me, you're in a relationship where in that relationship, you know that things are not going right. But you don't want to cause an argument, but you don't want to cause a problem. And here's something that I've come to realize about life, which I think is really important. And I've learned this firsthand. If you ignore a problem, the problem does not go away. I will repeat what I've just said because it's so important. If you ignore a problem, the problem does not go away. As a general rule, I have found in my life that if you ignore a problem, it gets worse. It doesn't improve. And so that's why leadership is so important, because unless one of you in the relationship takes up leadership and is willing to disrupt the status quo, is willing to accept that their partner might shout at them, that their partner might say, I don't want to be with you, you're being selfish, why are you trying to cause argument, then nothing can improve in that relationship. So I wonder whether you are the kind of individual who is able to disrupt stuff, is the kind of person who's willing to step out in front, who is the kind of person who's willing to lead, to go first. So many of you guys who are listening to me, there are things in your life that are not working. But the issue is you don't want to break the status quo. You don't want to upset anyone. You don't want people to see you differently. I said that the day that you're willing to go alone is the day that you become a leader. The day, if you say that truly your happiness is that important, that you are willing to disrupt your relationship at the cost that your partner might break up with you, that is the day you become a leader. That is the day that you begin to get on that path of actually getting to the point where you can achieve that happiness that you desire. Because now you have the freedom to go out there, to go and find the kind of person who can be able to help you live in that space of happiness. I want you to really, really think about that. I love something that John Quincy Adams said. John Quincy Adams once said that if your actions inspire others to dream more, to do more, and to become more, then you are in fact a leader. He said, you don't need a position, you don't need a status, you don't need to have some amazing accolades. Your actions just need to inspire other people to dream more, to do more, to become more. So here's a question that I would ask you. Do your actions inspire other people. And the key word here that I want you to pay attention to is action. Because you see, leadership is a verb, not a noun. Leadership is a moving thing. You have to do something about it. I love something that Tony Robbins once said. Tony Robbins once said that, you know, in the world, there are a lot of people who can complain about things, who can tell you how things used to be, who can tell you about how the past used to be. They can talk about the good old days. Then there is a number of people who can tell you how things actually are. They can tell you the truth. They can tell you what the current situation is. And then he said, there is a very, very few number of people who have the ability to tell you how things can be. When you become a leader, that is the day that you begin to operate your life from, okay, we've got a problem, but it can get better. Okay, I am here right now, but I know where I'm trying to be. And the question that I would ask you, and to really consider in your own life, is, are you the kind of person who is an active person? Every time you find yourself in a situation where things aren't going the way that you want, where the conditions that you're currently operating from are not what you want, are you the kind of individuals who operates, who does something about it, who sees the vision? The ability to see things better than what they currently are is what puts you in that category of a leader. And we need more of those kind of individuals. We've got so many crises and so many problems in the world, and loads of people complain about the negativity. Loads of people complain about social media. Loads of people complain about mental health. Loads of people complain about the lack of housing. Loads of people complain about the fact that interest rates and are really high, or the fact that getting a mortgage is really difficult. Loads of people complain about working conditions. Loads of people talk about the lack of opportunities, but very few people are doing anything about them. Very few people are coming forward and offering solutions. My question to you is, are you the kind of individual who offers solutions? Because a lot of people are complainers. In fact, this was one of the most difficult things that I had to eradicate out of my system. Because, you know, I found myself in debt 6 years ago. And when I found myself in debt, one of the things that I really struggled with is I struggled with the fact that, one, I couldn't improve and I couldn't get better and I couldn't get out of debt because I'd spent so much time blaming the bailiffs, right? The bailiffs were calling me left, right, centre. The bailiffs were on my back. They were sending me letters. They were turning up at my house. Do you know what? If it wasn't for the bailiffs adding extra interest on my loans, then my loans would not be so much. I'd spent so much time complaining and pointing the finger at other people that I never even had the time to come up with solutions, yet alone come up with ideas. Right? Because ultimately, you have to understand that ideas is what all of us actually get options from. And you can't get choices and you can't get options if you're so focused on blaming everybody else. And what I would encourage you to do is to get away from that mentality of complaining. Let me share with you a story. So, from about 2011 to 2014 or 15, I think it was, I was an estate agent. And in that time, I used to have a guy called George Steedman, an amazing manager. He taught me a lot of things. And when I was working with George, we used to have what we called quarterly meetings, quarterly reviews. So every quarter, we would go into a meeting and we would look at my figures, what I'd achieved, what my targets were for things like how many houses I'd sold compared to how many houses I said I was going to sell, how many referrals to mortgages and solicitors and surveys I'd actually referred and people had taken up compared to what I'd set as a goal. And I remember after a year of being really successful and winning loads of awards, I had a period or month where my statistics were not doing very well. And I remember I went into a meeting with George, and George sat back and George said to me, so Cassim, what's been happening? Like, obviously your results are not very good at the moment. What's happening in your life? Why do you think that you're not doing very well? And I remember George sitting back, and he was really listening to me patiently, and he was there in the moment. And I said to George, George, we've got the Crossrail happening, we've got loads of investors who keep outbidding everybody. I sit right at the back of the office, and so every single time somebody walks into the office, I don't have an opportunity to speak to them first. And I gave George excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse about the reason why my results were not doing very well. And George said something to me that I'll never forget. George said to me, Cassim, point at me. And I thought, bit of a weird thing, but okay. So I pointed at George. And George said to me, Cassim, how many fingers are pointing back at you? And I thought, well, there are no fingers pointing back at me. And George said to me, Cassim, there is. You've got 4 fingers pointing back at you. George said to me, Cassim, always remember that every single time you point the finger, there are 4 other fingers pointing back at you. And that day was a life-defining day for me. I remember it so clearly because that made me, every time I'm complaining at somebody and I'm saying they have done this to me and the government haven't done this and the interest rates are not right and the bank has fucked me up this and my boss has done that, I always have to look back and say, Cassim, there are 4 other fingers pointing back at you. Because one of the things that I think is really important, and I think many people don't understand, is that most people do not operate their life from a space and the philosophy of doing the best that they can with what they've got. And if you want to truly begin to get into the leadership position, I would encourage you to develop this philosophy of doing the best that you can with what you've got. Forget about having loads of things. Forget about being ready. Forget about having loads of resources. Forget about everybody supporting you. Forget about having the team. You want to begin to operate yourself from a space where you say, do you know what? I'm going to do the best that I can with what I've got. So let me give you a perfect example of this. Most of you can clearly see that I'm recording this and I'm doing this on a camera, right? I'm doing this on my phone, actually, right? I don't have some fancy... This microphone that I'm recording on today cost me, I think, 80 quid, right? Now, the professional speakers and like the radio DJ speakers, they have microphones which are £1,000. I don't have £1,000. Well, I do, but I don't want to spend £1,000 on a speaker right now because I simply don't have that flexibility to be able to do that, right? I could be in a studio, and most of you know people like Joe Rogan and people like that. They have a massive studio, they have sound effects, they have all of this amazing production behind them. But if I truly am going to be the leader that I talk to people so much about, I have to get to the space and the place where I do the best that I can. Look, guys, clearly I'm doing this and I'm not the most polished person and I'm not articulating these ideas in the best possible way that I can, but I'm trying to do my best. I may not be the most experienced speaker on the topic of leadership, but I'm trying to do my best. I'm trying to do the best that I can with what I've got. And that's what I essentially encourage you to do. I encourage you to develop that philosophy of doing the best that you can, of taking what you've got and elevating it to the next level. Because opportunities begin to present themselves when you begin to do the best that you can with what you've got. So I really encourage you to take up leadership, to stop complaining and to start doing the best that you can. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you, which I thought was really interesting, is about the infinite game and the finite game. You see, most of you guys who are going to listen to me, unfortunately, as I say this, and this kind of sounds quite sad for me to say this. So actually, let me go back a little bit and let me explain something before I go into the next point. So firstly, let me set it up. I believe that every human being on this planet was born to be a leader. Now, I'm going to repeat that because it's so important. It's going to set the foundation for what I want to talk about next. every human being on this planet was born to be a leader, in my opinion. Now, if you do not agree with that statement, if in the back of your mind you're saying, well, that's a stupid comment, Cassim, because if everybody was supposed to be a leader, then who is going to be a follower? If you've just said that in the back of your mind, or you've just made that statement, that right there is proof that you have been conditioned excellently by society. Do you know why? Because society has actually convinced you that there are some people who are superior, that everybody is not on the same playing field, that there are some people who human being was supposed to be a leader in an area of gifting, in an area of life, right? Now, many of you who are listening to me will say, well, Cassim, how the hell is everybody supposed to be a leader? Well, you see, I believe that every single person on the planet has something to offer the planet, right? I believe that you listening to me, there is something that you have that is special and that is unique, that only you can do it the way that you are going to do it. And in fact, if you don't believe that statement, we're all fucked. And actually, in essence, you cannot really make any difference in the world. Because if you don't recognize your significance, and you don't recognize that you're important, and you don't recognize that you have something special and something different to offer this planet, then you can't even dare to begin to go out to try to do something. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do is that you want to begin to undo some of the conditioning that you've been given. Because if you actually look around at the world has done an excellent job in convincing most human beings that most human beings are insignificant. The world has done an excellent job in convincing most human beings that most human beings are not special. The world, think about it for a minute. When you go to school, you take exactly the same exams as everybody else, as if people think in the same way, and as if people don't have different capacities, and as if people don't have different learning abilities. So when you went to school, they told you exactly how things were. Let me really give you a more relevant example of this that you've probably never thought of. Let me ask you a question. In the UK, we know that the speed limit, the maximum that you can drive a car, according to the law, is 70 miles an hour. That is the absolute maximum that you can drive a car. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. Clearly, if you're on a driving track, on a race track, you can clearly drive your car at completely different speeds. But on a normal road in the UK, you cannot drive a car, according to the law, more than 70 miles an hour. Again, as I say, clearly, if you're overtaking or whatever, and most people do drive over 70, but according to the law, you can't do that. Let me ask you this question. If the government themselves know that people should not be driving over 70 miles an hour, why then do they allow a car to be made and delivered to the UK that has the ability to drive at 120? It's an interesting question, isn't it? I bet you've probably never thought about that. If the UK government know that people cannot, that if you drive your car over 70 miles an hour, the chances of killing somebody, everything is like dramatically increased. Why then do they allow for human beings to drive their cars, or why do they allow for cars to be imported into the UK and made in the UK that are able to do more than 70 miles an hour? I just want you to think about why that question is, because most people have never thought about it. Most people don't even consider that. The whole world has been designed to cage you, to make you think like a sheep, to get you to fit and behave like everybody else. You know, I say to people all the time, let me ask you this question. Why is it that when you go to school, that when you leave school, school do not say to you, you want to leave school and then go and start your own business? Why is that? Because did you know that I say to people all the time, it's fascinating for me. Have you ever, and if you live in the UK and you're listening to this in the UK, this will be really interesting for you. Have you ever seen a Chinese person in a workplace where they were not either in management or the owner of the organization. Think about it. Of every Chinese person that you know, do you know a single Chinese person in your life who you know or you've seen where when you've gone into a workplace, into a place where an exchange of product or service is done, where the Chinese person was not in management or was not the owner of the organization? Because I've been all over the world, I've been all over the UK, and I've never found not one Chinese person is in a level which is below management. They're either in management or they own the organization. Did you know that in China, do you know what they teach kids in China when they leave school? In China, they teach kids that when they leave school, they are to go and start a business. That is what, to go and employ, to deploy and not be employed. See, most people in the UK are taught to be employees. Most people are not encouraged to become employers. So whenever you don't even think that you have the ability to lead. So as I'm talking about leadership and I'm talking about stepping into leadership, you already discount yourself and you say, Cassim, that's not for me. I'm not into this leadership thing, because you've been conditioned your entire life to not be a leader. You've been conditioned to be a sheep. And so one of the things that is really, really important is, number one, you have to recognize the conditioning, because if you don't recognize the conditioning, you're just going to say, I'm lying and I'm not telling you the truth. So I think that it's really, really, really important to, number one, understand that you are significant and that you're important. Now, if you understand this, this then leads us into what I want to talk about, which is the infinite game and the finite game. So there are two types of games that you can play. There is what is called a finite game and an infinite game. A finite game is a game like football. Okay, if you play football, you go to football, the rules are the same. You go, you play the football game, and there's a winner and there's a loser. Okay, if it's a draw, then eventually you'll go to penalties and a winner will be decided via penalties. Right? It's the same all over the world. It's evident that the rules are the same. Right? So that's what's called a finite game. An infinite game is a game where you can never win. Let me give you a game. An infinite game would be like business. So for example, if your company, the company that you work for, made, let's say, £50 million worth of profit this year, next year, the game isn't over. The company doesn't just shut down. Next year, the company will raise that to 60. And next year, if it makes 80, do you know what it will do? It will raise it to 90. So meaning it's a game where you can never win. No matter how much you achieve, you can never win. Let's go backwards now. Why am I telling you this? You see, most people in life are playing what is called the finite game. Most people are living their life on, when I get the money, then I'll do this. When I'm 50, then I'll do this. When I become successful, then I'll do this. When I have a family, then I'll be happy. When I'm retired, then I'll relax. That is how most people live their lives. Now, most people, unfortunately, are never going to get to a point in their life where they are able to play the infinite game. The goal of life is to get to the point where you play the infinite game. Because you cannot become a leader until you start playing on operating your life as an infinite game. Let me explain. So in my quest to figure out people who've started with nothing and have built incredible lives, I started studying people, reading their autobiographies. And of course that meant going all the way to the top echelons of different arenas of life and looking at people who are really, really successful. And and I know for most of you who are listening to this is going to be bizarre, but when you start achieving success, you will reach a point where you have everything. And I know for most people listening to this, that is unheard of. You cannot even comprehend having everything. But some people have got to a point in their life where they have so much money that money is no longer an object. they have a family, they have a wife, they have children, their children are happy, their children are healthy, they have income coming in, they have a career that they love, they have everything, they live in a nice neighborhood, they have friends, right? They're able to go on any holiday around the world. And that may sound like paradise, but it is a major, major problem, because when that happens, a question arises which most people never think of in their life. The question is, what now? The day that you decide to ask yourself that question, what now? What do I do now? You're about to become a leader. Because you are now at a point where you have nothing to lose. You've gained everything or you've lost everything. When you have nothing to lose, the only way, when you're at the bottom, the only way that you can go is up, right? And when you get to the point where you are like, what the hell do I do with my life now? I mean, I have a house, I have money, I have a missus, I have an income. What the hell do I do now? I know that you're about to become a leader. I know that you're positioned to become a leader. Now, unfortunately, because most people don't have the drive and they don't have the ambition and they don't study success and they don't have the resilience, what ends up happening is they never get to this point in their life. They never achieve success quickly enough in their life to get to the point where they can ask that question. What I encourage you to do is, if you wish to become a leader and you recognize its significance, ask yourself that question now. Ask yourself the question, what do I do now? Because when you ask that question, what it will force you to do is it will force you to live the infinite game. You will start going after things that are so big, that are so audacious, that you will begin to start to think like Steve Jobs, which is that you now want to leave a dent in the universe. You realize that clearly your life is significant, but you're nothing in comparison to the rest of the world and the problems that are actually out there. That's why you will then adopt Buddha's philosophy, which says that every day good people have to wake up and try to empty the ocean with a spoon. The day that you decide that even though something is really big, and even though you're probably never going to achieve it, and even though you're probably going to just go and try to do this by yourself, but you're still going to go for it, all of a sudden a leader is born. All of a sudden remarkable things are going to be done. The day that you decide, like me, that it doesn't matter whether you have 1 million views or you have 10 views, you're still going to do the Leadership 101. The day that you decide that irrelevant of whether I make money out of this, I'm still going to share information with people, hopefully that can help them to become a higher follow expression of themselves, is the day that a leader is born. And I'm asking you to step into this because we need leaders. We need to have leaders. We're lacking leaders. We need people who can step into the role of leadership, who can go forward and attack things. You know, one of the things, as I want to conclude, as we're getting closer to the hour, that I want to conclude today off with, is that I want to talk to you about something that fascinated me, which was the difference between the apex predators of the world. So there's a book that I'm due to write in maybe 3 or 4 years about the apex predators of the world. So I looked at, why is the lion called the king of the jungle? Why is the shark the king of the sea? Why is the eagle the king of the bird kingdom? Because if you look at these animals, if you look at the bird, the eagle, and you look at the lion, let's for example take the lion. If you look at the lion is not the biggest animal in the jungle. I think all of us can agree with that. You've got elephants and you've got giraffes, right? It's not the biggest, it's not the tallest, it's not the smartest. You've got animals like the hyena. So why is it that the lion is called the king of the jungle? If it's not the biggest, it's not the tallest, it's not the strongest animal in the jungle. And what I found was that lions think very differently. You see, let me give you a statement actually, because this statement will set a good foundation. An army of sheep led by a lion will always defeat an army of lions led by a sheep. Oh, this is good. I'm giving you some good stuff here. Let me repeat that statement. An army of sheep led by a lion will always defeat an army of lions led by a sheep. Because leadership can transform cowards into violent warriors. What I found was, when a lion sees an elephant, the lion does not think that elephant is too big for me. That elephant is, in other words, when leaders think about problems, leaders do not see obstacles. Leaders look at the horizon. Leaders see where they want to go. See, most people, when we look at problems in our lives, guess what the first thing that comes up? We don't have the money. How are we going to do it? No. Leaders don't think like this. Leaders focus on the vision, and then they say, okay, what do I need to get? Who do I need to become? That's how leaders think. When a lion sees an elephant, it thinks lunch. I can attack this thing. And here's where it gets really interesting. When an elephant sees a lion, guess what it thinks? It thinks danger. It thinks I'm prey. It thinks that lion is going to eat me. Now, how can something so powerful as an elephant be scared of by a lion? Because they think differently. Let me put it like this. At the beginning of today, I shared with you that leadership is not about position. It is not about power. It is not about influence. It is not about authority. It is not about social status. It is not about charisma. The reason why I said this is because there are a lot of people who are in positions of power, who are really rich, who are really wealthy, who are really influential, who are really charismatic, but they're not leaders. They don't use the power and their position and their status to do good in the world, to attack problems, to solve issues in the world. And what I would say to you is this. You want to begin to think like a lion. You want to begin to have the mentality, if you wish to, as I said earlier on, correct anything in the world, make anything happen, make changes, develop anything or improve anything or correct anything. In order to correct stuff and improve stuff and make changes, you're going to have to focus on the horizon, on the goal, rather than the fact of the problems that are facing you. And if you will begin to do this, guys, I believe that you will begin to step into the role of leadership. Let me finish off with this. I believe that all leaders are born. But whether you become a leader or not is a completely different thing. Every single person has the capacity to become a leader. Every single person, as I said to you earlier on, was born to be a leader in an area of gifting, in an area of life. But whether somebody actually ends up entering into that role and ends up actually following that pursuit of leadership is a completely different matter. And what I would share with you is that if you will begin to step into that role and you will begin to actually use your area of gifting to improve lives, the rest of us are going to benefit. The rest of us are going to live in a better world. And I love something that I think is really one of the final statements that I'd love to finish off to share with you, which is, what world do you want to live behind when you die? What area of life do you want to leave improved when you pass away? Because I think you're going to agree with me, you're going to pass away at some point. But will an area of life be better because you were here? Will an area of life have been changed, improved, developed, or corrected because you were on this planet in some way? It doesn't matter whether it's in a big way, but will it be improved in some way because you were on this planet? So that concludes this week's episode of Leadership 101. I don't know whether it was useful to you. I wanted to have a place where I can share with you guys, thoughts on leadership, and I can share with you guys some things that I've been thinking about leadership, because leadership is so important that most people don't understand its significance. Most people don't understand the impact it can have on their lives, on their family, on their communities, if only they will activate it. A lot of people tend to think that leadership is management. Management is part of leadership, but leadership is something completely different in itself. And that's why I feel that I've been put in a position now where I have to talk about leadership. I didn't even want to talk about leadership, but I wanted to talk about motivation and inspiring people and helping people, but I've been pushed into functioning in an area that isn't my strength, that it isn't something that I even want to talk about, but I believe is so important that we activate it in our lives if we are to live in a better world. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope today has helped you in some way. If you want to support me, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel Cassim on YouTube for more. Otherwise, I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.